Hello, Pharma Life family. I'm here with Destiny. She's a two-time guest of the Pharma Life, and we are very excited she's here. I'm excited to share a story with you. We're in March, the end of March, and we're in a little bit of a sun shower right now. So we're in the bright sun, but we are getting wet. It's kind of nice. Interesting weather patterns here in March. Getting a lot more rain than we're accustomed to. But Destiny is attending the Eat, Move, Rest retreat for the second time. She was here 2 years ago, and she's come back, and she reports some really awesome stories of transformation. So we wanted to share that with you all for your own inspiration. Let's go back 2 years ago. What brought you to attend the Eat, Move, Rest retreat?
So when I look back, I almost feel like it was half superficial reasons and then half an unconscious desire. Like, I feel on the surface level, it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm vegan, and this vegan couple that I follow, they're going to this place that looks beautiful, and it would be really cool to go and spend time with them on a retreat. But on an unconscious level, I think my soul was already pulling me to have an experience like this, just because of where I was at that point in my life. I was so disconnected. I was so disconnected from who I was. I had absolutely no idea who I was. If you asked me, Destiny, what makes you happy? I couldn't tell you, because who I was based on the perception that people wanted me to be, whether that was significant others, friends, family, so on. I had absolutely no idea who I was, what I wanted out of life. I was just kind of falling along based on what other people were telling me to do. I wasn't fully living. So I think my soul all along knew that it needed something like this for me to become who I needed to become. Yeah.
And what was your experience attending the retreat?
Oh, it was pretty bad, but not because of the farm or anything like that, but because I was so outside my comfort zone. 2 years ago, I was someone who, at the time, I owned a house and had a beautiful backyard with a stream surrounded by trees and everything. I never went outside.
You never went outside?
I never went outside. I never stepped 2 feet out there, because I was just scared of the outdoors, which sounds so silly to say, but just everything about the natural elements was uncomfortable for me, which that was a great insight into how disconnected I was, because growing up, I was in summer camps, in the woods from when I was 6 to 14. So I used to be a very outdoorsy person, but then when I started losing myself, I became completely disconnected from that. So I didn't want to be outside. Animals, insects, all of the above, I wanted nothing to do with it. I think I was the living embodiment of a prissy city girl.
You're a city girl.
Yeah. And so then we get off the bus here, and I look around, and I'm like, what did I just get myself into?
There are no walls in the dining hall.
No, there's no walls in the dining hall. I picked the nicest cabin thinking, okay, well, at least if I'm in the nicest cabin, I won't have to worry about anything. Well, no, there's still screens and everything, so it's it's closed in, but you still have the elements there. And it sounds silly to talk about now, because this is such a beautiful place, but it was just a testament to just how closed off I was and just so out of my element I was. And I hadn't been out of my comfort zone up until that point, that I was just extremely anxious the entire time. I think that week I cried at least once a day, every single week. And I think I went to my room every night, and I looked up prices to change my flight, or what the cost would be to get a cab from here to San Jose, because I was so uncomfortable. But in retrospect, I understand that's exactly what needed to happen. I needed to be so uncomfortable that I would break. And that's what happened. The universe broke me while I was here to let light in, so I could become who I needed to be. Because the path that I was heading on, I wasn't going to take the initiative myself to change my life. So I needed something to push me beyond my brink to force me to change. Yeah.
Okay, and you told a story about Dusty. Dusty spoke to you at that retreat. So
Yeah.
Dusty's the facilitator at Eat, Move, Rest.
So I think the common theme, you know, and like just to give some insight into like who I was then, you know, I was a severe, highly functioning alcoholic. I was clinically obese. You know, I suffered from a lot of depression. The depression is what contributed to the alcoholism and the obesity. I gained 100 pounds in a year. You know, my drinking was really bad, and I hated myself. Like, it's everything about who I was. I hated myself. I didn't have confidence. Self-esteem was like a word that like I didn't even have the capacity to understand. Like, I had no self-worth, and I was just allowing myself to be treated like very horribly. And so on the Eat, Move, Rest retreats, we have these coaching sessions, which are basically when the group gets together, and it's a really, you know, safe, vulnerable space where people kind of just open up, and, you know, you spend all day, every day with a group of people in a place like this where you can't distract yourself with technology. You're kind of forced to get vulnerable, even if you're like me at the time and don't want to. And so people could see the wars I was fighting, you know, inside. They could see the capacity to which I didn't love myself. And Dusty, you know, he basically looked at me at the end and he was like, I'm going to talk to you like if I'm your brother, because we've become like family. And he said, it's your responsibility to heal yourself. It's your responsibility to learn to love yourself for the people who are depending on you for it. And at the time, like, I didn't really understand what he meant by that, because I was like, I'm not gonna get on YouTube like you and Aaron and start talking about my story. But then in that same setting, you know, he asked, like, will you make a commitment to us that you will start to love yourself? And I thought about it for a minute, because I'm someone that my word means everything. So I didn't want to say yes if I knew I was going to go back home and like not do the work. So I thought about it for a couple seconds, and then I said yes. And I knew I was going to be able to, because of two really impactful experiences that I had had those days leading up to it. The first one was sun gazing with Brian. And I remember we went down there, and initially I was uncomfortable because we had to be barefoot, and I was just like not having that at the time. But we went there, and basically he was explaining to us just the effects, how it just helps decalcify our pineal gland, which is essentially our third eye, and, you know, just the door to our connection with our spiritual self. And he shared his story about how he has felt that changed his life. And then he just went through a couple different beginner exercises to be able to do it. And I was a skeptic, like, pretty much. If I was someone who, if I couldn't, like, if there was no logic or fact behind it, I wasn't going to believe it. That's who I was. So I was very skeptical. But then I did it, and I had a very powerful experience where I saw like explosions of colors, and I didn't even have to do the beginner hand like movements to like make it easier. I was able to stare, and like I couldn't make any reason behind the visions I was seeing. And then that night, it was art night. And I remember I was just painting, and it was very abstract. Like, you couldn't look at it and define it, but it was like the background was blue, and it was just like a red explosion. And I remember at the time you were like, it's actually very feminine, like this is like feminine energy. And I realized it was two things. I had been in my masculine energy my entire life, and it was almost like that was my feminine energy trying to come out. And it also felt like it was my soul exploding out of me. Like, the blue represented like the wall that I had my entire life, and the red was like my heart and my soul like bursting out. And that's what I saw when I was sun gazing. And then the next day after that, we had the cacao ceremony. And the girl who didn't want to leave her room, didn't want to be here, didn't want to do anything, was dancing barefoot in the grass, in the rain. And it was, I think, the first time in my life I experienced true presence. Like, I was someone who my mind was going constantly. Like it didn't know how to stop. And during that ceremony, all I could think of was just that moment and just the connection that I was having. So I think those two experiences just kind of opened my mind and just like bursted the door open of my soul, if that makes sense. Like it was no longer being like bound by the wall that I had up. So even if I didn't fully understand it at that time, I think when I said yes, it was like my higher self knowing like, yes, you can do this because I'm out now, if that makes sense.
It's really lovely. I've had a moment in my life too where I just was like, yes, like it just comes running right through. Yes, my soul is calling me forward here. That's lovely that you experienced it.
Yeah.
And often here at Farmer Life we'll say like, we never know when someone's going to get their medicine, where like that activity is the thing that pops them open.
Absolutely.
In your case, cacao ceremony and sun gazing, lovely. You know, sometimes it's yoga and qigong, or it's obviously the plant medicine work.
So then after that, I went home and I went from never stepping outside, like my backyard ever, to I started sun gazing like every day. And so when I started, it was still cold because I lived in New Hampshire at the time, but I would just bundle up and I would just go on like the little back porch. And I would do it in the morning. And then as it started getting like warm, it's like, okay, there was a cleared patch of dirt that I felt comfortable with. So I would stand there to ground while I sun gaze.
Yeah.
And then I worked my way up to, okay, this grass looks okay. So I'll do it there. And then before I know it, I'm walking on my backyard barefoot. And then I realized that really the root of everything was a lack of love for myself and a lack of compassion for myself. And I just basically dedicated myself to letting go of things that didn't serve me. And that started with the negative thoughts that I had about myself and the negative habits that I was having, essentially because I was binge eating and I was binge drinking, not because those were habits I had had my whole life, but it was how I was dealing with the depression that I had at the time. So then once I learned to love myself and have compassion for myself, those stopped. And once I stopped doing those, I started losing weight, you know? And so, you know, I did that. And
How much weight did you lose?
So I've lost about 70 pounds.
Well done.
Thank you.
And did you stay in touch with Aaron and Dusty over
I
the
did.
years?
Oh, I absolutely did. Yeah. So we kept in touch. They always checked in. And so it was probably, so I left and I said, oh, like, I'm never coming back. Like, I'll never do this retreat again just because who I was then, and just, I don't know, like I didn't see the benefit of it. But then as I started like getting into the work more and more, and I started writing again. I used to be a writer when I was younger, and I realized I had stopped because I was almost afraid of confronting the thoughts. You know, like I was giving them so much power, whereas if I wrote them and let them go, they wouldn't have that power anymore. So I started writing again. I started becoming much more aligned like with my spiritual self, and like not with just the 3D reality that's promoted to us in the States. So I quit my job and I basically didn't work for like 7 months.
Wow.
Where I just like devoted myself to just becoming completely present. And it sounds silly, but like there were days where I would just sit and I would stare at birds, because I remember when I was here, when I was having like my panic attacks, I'd be up there on the balcony and a hummingbird would come by, and like I would just be so focused on that, and it would ground me. And so I just, because presence was something I struggled with, I just devoted myself to that, and you know, ended up leaving a relationship with someone that I was going to marry, but it didn't serve me. It wasn't aligned like with my life path. It wasn't really the life I wanted to have, because up until that point, it was what I was told and taught. I was following that path. So I basically spent 7 months just devoting it to myself and my spiritual health, my mental health, my physical health. And that's when I was like, I need to go back. I need to go on this retreat again, because it literally changed my life. I got so much out of it. And that's while I was completely closed off for an entire week. I need to go back and experience it with like fully who I am now. Like I need to be present and be open to like all the lessons that I was taught there, because if I change to this capacity with who I was then, I can't imagine what I will take away from this with the woman that I am now, that is not only open to this, I've devoted my life to this lifestyle. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, the sort of the death and destruction of, you know, leaving your career and leaving a fiance, those are big changes. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I'd say 2021 was probably one of the hardest years of my life, because it's easy to talk about now, like, oh, I let this go, I let this go. But in the moment, they were the hardest things I've ever had to do, because I was also a people pleaser. So the thought of disappointing people was crippling to me. And I had never put myself first in my life. So I felt guilty. It felt selfish and foreign to make a decision just for me. And it was scary, because it was like, well, what if I do this and it doesn't work out? And he was like, what if?
Yeah.
But then
no one ever loves me again, and I never have another fiance.
Exactly.
I can't get a job again.
But then it's like, well, what if I take a leap of faith and the universe has my back, and I end up...
Trust abundance.
Exactly. And I end up experiencing something beyond what I can even imagine. And it's like fear held me back so much. And fear holds back everyone to some extent. I feel like I learned that it's kind of how we get controlled, essentially, through fear. So once I started recognizing the extent that it was holding me back, I basically just pushed myself out of my comfort zone in every single way, because it was like, well, if I can do this, then nothing can stop me, because I'm the only thing that's been stopping myself. So if I can push past my fears of these like surface little material things, then I can't get in my head. So another big thing that I ended up doing is I then moved across the country to Florida on my own. Like, no family there, no friends. I mean, Aaron and Dusty had just moved down there, but I wasn't moving near them. But because I didn't know who I was. Who I knew myself to be was based on people's projections onto me. I had been on my own, like not living at home since I went away to college, but I always had a roommate, or I was living with a significant other. Like, I really was never alone to figure out who I was. And I was like, well, then what better way to do that than to move somewhere where no one knows who I am, and I'm forced to be alone with myself and figure out who I really am. So the combination of all of that got me right back here.
Because in a new place, you can then just step into that space as the woman you are today, and no one's holding you back by...
Exactly. There's no judgment, there's no criticism, there's no projection of fears or opinions onto you. I get to just be, I get to just do.
So how has this week been here at Farm Life again?
Oh my gosh, I was telling Brian this morning, I remember 2 years ago now, I was like, I feel like I've been here for a month. Is Sunday gonna get here? And now I'm like, how is it already Friday? Like, I don't want to leave, and I can already feel just like how hard it's gonna be going back to the real world. But it's just been the most enlightening experience ever. Like, it's so beautiful, and I've gotten so much from it, and I'm still being pushed. You know, it's not like I came here and I expected it to be completely easy. You know, I say this isn't a place that you come to just go on vacation. I mean, I guess you can make it that.
Well,
but
let's talk about it, because you did Diamante and you got pushed hard. So that's that really big hike up to the top of the 600-foot waterfall.
Yes. So I didn't do that hike the last time I was here, because I knew physically I couldn't accomplish it, but I knew I was going to do it this time. And it's funny, because the big, not appeal, but one of the biggest things with that hike is that there's a big cliff jump once you get to the top. And as soon as we get there, the guide goes, oh, we can't do the cliff jump. Because,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so because of all the rain, it, like, trees and sticks had eroded, like, into it. So everyone was like, oh, no. And in that moment, it was like, okay, so the hike's not about the jump anymore. Like, it's kind of like, you know, man versus food. Now it's like destiny versus mountain. Like, and I think it's like people say, like, it's about the journey, not the destination. The hike became about that. And so Probably like I'd say 30 minutes in, it was like, wow, okay, this is hard.
It's a tough hike.
This is like, I knew it was gonna be a tough hike, but I think since I had been like physically active and I had started hiking again, I thought it was gonna be a little easier. But I was like, no, this is hard. But it was nice because there were about 4 of us that just stayed back, and we were just having a spiritual experience, like just soaking it all in. Like we had the people trying to race to the top, but we were like, the way down is going to be harder, so let's reserve our energy. And we were just like, wow, like look at how the roots are like growing through those rocks. It's just showing how like we can grow through anything if we have the will to grow. Or like spotting, and like every time that like I like stopped and it was like, this is exhausting, a blue butterfly would come, like
Yes.
leading the way. And I just kept repeating in my head, don't doubt yourself, don't doubt yourself, embrace it all. Because I recognize that like the universe made it so that hike ended up being exactly what it was. That was all conspired in my favor. And then the way down, I'd say, was when I got pushed the hardest, because on the way up, I'd say it was a bigger challenge mentally, but then physically, because then it started raining and then it got dark. It more than a little slippery. I mean, people were definitely slipping and falling down. So I was pushed beyond my brink physically and mentally. But again, that's what needed to happen. I was broken again, and it just gave me so much motivation to go back home and get in like the best shape of my life ever, and 2, it just really showed me the resilience that I have. Because it really was mental. Like I would say the last hour, so it was an 8-hour hike, I'd say the last hour was when physically it really started hurting, but all day was about mental. And like I've tried to really embody shifting my mindset the last 2 years. Like when I have a negative thought come, just shifting it to something positive, because I believe we create our reality. And if I'm saying negative things, I'm just creating that reality for myself.
Those challenges, they make you put your practice into practice.
And that's exactly what it was. Because when I'm home alone and like I have that thought, a thought come up, it's like, okay, well, like I can take my time like working through this. This was like in the moment. I needed to embody that, or else I wasn't going to get through it. So there were moments that I was like, can I do this? Well, I have no other option but to do it. There's only one way to get off the mountain.
One way to get to your hot shower.
Exactly. And I mean, the group is amazing, and we were all such a like great support system for each other. But yeah, it just really showed me what I'm made of, and I'm just so grateful for the experience and just proud of myself for working to the point that I could do that. And then I did it in like the toughest conditions possible. So yeah, I'm really grateful for the experience that I had at Diamante. I definitely think it's going to be one of those life experiences that I will look back on forever.
Yeah. Always remember. Sure. All good.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back.
Of course. Thank you
Thanks
for having
sharing
me.
with the Farm of Life family.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Love you all.